Hello, I'm Tiffany, creator of Red Petal Patterns, and today I wanted to talk about types of yarn. Not necessarily the yarn content, but how the yarn is constructed and why that makes a difference. The absolute most common yarn you are going to run into is going to be plied. This means they took fibers, natural or artificial, and they spun them into a thread, and then they took two or more of those threads and wrapped them together in the opposite direction to make the yarn. And if you took pretty much any basic yarn and twisted it the opposite way that it wants to go, it will separate. And this one has 4 individual little plies of yarn. So this is the ply. This is the yarn. Each one of these are individual spun threads. You can usually take these and then start splitting them off even smaller. How many doesn't really make a difference. You can have jumbo yarn that's only got 3 of those little threads in there. You can have little tiny yarn that's got 4 threads. It's just a matter of how it was spun and then how it was plied together. And this works the same way if you've ever twisted hair or made rope. You take the smaller ones and spin them one direction, twist them one direction, and then you take the 2 and wrap them around themselves in the other direction. So these will keep trying to go one way while this will try to unwrap the other way, and they will work against each other and stay clumped. If you were to cut the end, they no longer have anything to work against, and it will come undone towards the end. That's why rope and yarn will fray on the end. If you have short fibers, so most artificial fibers are going to be however long they wanted to make them. They can just be yards and yards and yards and yards long. They can be miles long when they extrude them, and you're not going to get a lot of little fibers. If you have yarn that's fuzzy but artificial fibers, they were intended. They made them that way. And they did that to mimic animal fibers. Animal fibers will have a lot of short, because if you think about it, animals' fur is only going to grow to a certain length. And you have all those little pieces, and they end up alternating how those pieces overlap each other in each one of those little twisted yarns. But you're still going to have ends that poke out, depending on how heavily they overlap them, how heavily they twisted them, that you will have these little, just like if you braided hair and you had little short pieces that stick out. The same thing will happen in the yarn. And these little short pieces that stick out give the appearance of thicker yarn, even though the middle of it is not that thick. And we call this a halo, this fuzzy part that sticks out. When you have a yarn that has a halo, you can use a larger gauge and a larger needle than you would for this center core. The center core may feel much smaller than what this is, because all of these little hairs are going to come loose and fill in that space in between, and it gives a very soft, blurred appearance to your work. And you work this a little bit looser. If you were going to do something tight, or if you were going to crochet something tight, this would be a complete waste of money to buy this yarn. Even though it feels soft, you have completely undone the whole purpose of that halo, to give that soft, blurred effect and to fill in those holes and make a light, airy piece that is still warm because all of those holes have been filled in. If you are already into crochet, then you know about my next yarn, and that is chenille. Chenille yarn is made by collecting thousands and thousands and thousands of these little fibers and using a thread that chains back and forth on itself, kind of like a DNA, like a helix, and that helix traps those little fibers in there. Those fibers are made of plastic, and they are tiny, and they shed. There's nothing keeping them there. If you just rub this yarn, those fibers come out. If you get them wet, they clump. If you wash this, that plastic is going down the drain every single time you wash this yarn. It's only a matter of time before all these little fibers fall out and all you have left is the chain in the center. If you were to make baby clothing, blankets, toys out of this, every time they chew on this, they run the risk of breaking that little thread in the middle or pulling these fibers out, which can get wet and clump in their airways and clog their breathing. This is not safe for children. This is definitely not safe for toddlers or infants in any capacity. And every time you wash it, these little fibers shed and go down the drain, which means it's not safe for the environment either, if you care about this sort of thing. I personally am not a fan of chenille yarn. I have never been a fan of chenille yarn, and I can't tell you not to buy it, but I can tell you the effects of using it. This also goes by blanket and velvet, and I would avoid it, but that's just me. Just know that whatever you make with this will not be sturdy, and it will not last. It will not hold up to wear or washing. It will become threadbare in a shockingly short amount of time and will need to be disposed of, which will put more plastic in landfills because you cannot make anything sturdy out of this type of yarn. So proceed with caution. The last two yarns I'm going to talk about are eyelash. Eyelash or fake fur can have the feeling of chenille. It has a hairy appearance. That's what's called eyelash. It just looks like a bunch of eyelashes across there. It can be thin enough to make fur out of. So you can make a stuffed animal out of fake fur or eyelash yarn and get the same soft, furry effect that you would if you had purchased one made of fake fur or terry. The way that it's made are these fibers are intended to be this way. It's made with weaving down here at the bottom and then loops at the top, and then those loops get cut so that they make this hair. So these are actually trapped in a binding on this edge. So when you knit, all of this is what gives it its structure, and then these stick out to make its fuzzy appearance. This is a much safer option if you feel you need to use fuzzy yarn, because there is a lot less chance of these eyelashes shedding off. The thicker these eyelashes are, the less chance there is of them shedding and causing a problem in the environment or with children. The last yarn I'm going to talk about is boucle yarn. Boucle yarn can come in any size. You can get little tiny boucle yarn. You can get giant boucle yarn. I happen to have some old yarn that's boucle. And the way boucle is made is you have one thick unspun string of yarn that is wound very loosely around a very thin piece of spun yarn. This one happens to be a really thick unspun artificial acrylic, I believe. But you can see how there's thick and thin little ripples, and that it makes these little zigzags. And it is a large one loosely wrapped around a tight small one, and it gives all these little bumps and ridges, and it gives a very pebbled appearance when it's been knitted up. And it's a fun yarn to work with. If you got boucle yarn that's very, very thin, you can make really fine wearables out of it, like skirts and blazers that'll have a really beautiful pebbled appearance. They make, I believe it's viscose that they do that with now, or acetate, I can't remember now. It's a very common fabric that they make that's got that pebbled appearance. Now here is another yarn that I came across in my stash, and it's very tiny, so you may not be able to see it. This is a knitted tube, a very, very tiny knitted tube. So there's nothing spun. You can't unwrap it. There's no halo. This is very, very solid. It's just a solid tube. And it gives an interesting appearance when it's knitted because there's no looseness, there's no flatness to it. It's very textured because of that. You can also find ribbon yarn, which is going to be flat like a hair ribbon, and they're usually silky. And if you think about tying a bow or twisting ribbon and how you get these flat pieces that are twisted in and out or folded, and that gives a very interesting texture. Now, the reason you need to know about these different types of yarn and how they're constructed is because different types of yarn are meant for different purposes. Almost anything that is not that first generic plied yarn is called novelty yarn. Novelty yarns are not going to hold up to structure or stitches, or texture. You wouldn't be able to do cables or lace, or it'll just get lost in all that texture. There's too much there, and it doesn't have the structure to it. So if I knitted a sweater, it's going to just lay. It's going to lay there. It's not going to have any shape to it. It wouldn't matter if I increased or decreased or put stitches in it or put cables in it. It's going to be just a field of texture, and it will just have the loosest drape. It would just be draping a sheet over you. It's not going to hold up to any kind of shape or texture. So it's good for skirts, or if you wanted a very loose, unstructured blouse. It's something that's just going to kind of hang there. But it's not going to show off any shaping. It's good for dolman sleeves or boat necks, or a straight shape, or a skirt that needs to be able to swish as you walk instead of just being a solid block that moves in one piece. But do not break your own heart by trying to do cables or lace on a textured novelty yarn. That's not what it was made for. It's all about the yarn at that point and not the stitches. And I believe that is all the basics that you would need to know about the different structures of the yarn. The only other thing that you would need to know is for fiber content. You're going to have, there's plant fibers, artificial fibers, and animal fibers. So animal fibers are going to be your wools, and they can be made from literally any animal. They are generally, unless it says superwash, it's going to knot up on you. We have covered that in felting before. And it's going to have a lot of warmth. It's going to have a lot of body to it, but you're going to need to be careful about washing it so that you don't felt it. Plant fibers, some of them can be washed, some of them can't. If you have something like cotton or flax, or flax and linen are the same thing, those are going to be so durable, and they're only going to get softer the more you wear them and the more you wash them. And they're going to be warm in the winter, they're going to be cool in the summer, they're going to wick moisture away from you, you're going to be able to regulate your temperature better, it's not going to hold on to smells, and it will show all of your stitches the same as a animal fiber would. Some of them can be washed, some of them can't. Like I said, cotton and linen are excellent choices if you want to go with natural fibers and not animal fiber. Lastly, you have your artificial fibers, and these are not all plastic. I don't think they're all plastic. They're all petroleum based. And that's where you come up with your nylons, your polyesters, your acrylics. If you went to the store and saw Red Heart Super Saver or I Love This Yarn, those are all acrylic. There is nothing wrong with buying acrylic yarn. I'm going to repeat that again. There's nothing wrong with buying acrylic yarn. If you are making yourself a sweater that you want to be durable, warm, have structure to it, and last for a long time because you put a lot of work into it and you want to keep this sweater for years and years. You don't want to pill, you don't want to have to hand wash it, you want to be able to throw it in the washer and dryer and it come out looking and feeling great year after year after year after year because you want that sustainable fashion. That is a really good pairing with acrylic. It is inexpensive, it is durable, it is low maintenance, and it comes in a bazillion colors. There is nothing wrong with that. It's not going to be exactly the same as, say, an animal fiber. It's never going to be the same as a plant fiber. It will look like an animal fiber. You can get really nice, soft, premium acrylics and premium nylons and premium polyester. That's what I was thinking of. You can get really nice premium yarns in those fibers, and it will look fabulous. Now, they're not going to wick. They're going to hold in heat. They're not going to perform the same as animal fiber. They're not going to feel the same as animal fiber, but they will look the same. And if you have allergies or a low budget, that's fine. There is nothing wrong with buying the acrylic yarn. Just try to go for the nicest acrylic yarn you can afford. So that you get that softness after it's been washed and dried. You can, and we went over that before, but again, don't break your own heart buying really expensive yarn that is unsuitable for the project that you're going to try to make. And that is all I have to say about that. I'll see you next time. Bye.